Kurien. Denny has more than 25 years of experience in media, investing, and entrepreneurships. He is the president and CEO of Keiretsu Forum, which is a global investment community of accredited private equity, angel investors, venture capitalists, and corporate institutional investors. Denny has been a business journalist for multiple media organizations like Financial Express, Business Standard, Dow Jones Newswires, and the Wall Street Journal. So, Denny, what is your assessment of the impact of this pandemic on the Indian startup ecosystem? And also, from your perspective, what are the attractive opportunities arising out of this chaos? And again, what role does Keiretsu Forum is playing as a catalyst to support the startup ecosystem in India? Over to you, Denny.
Thank you, Gaurav. Let me very quickly check. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, it's always a challenge to go as the last speaker, but I'm glad I did that today, especially after Sunil and Sachin went. As Prabal and many others were saying, there have been a barrage of webinars of late as people are sitting at home. And as you dial into more and more of these, while you very well know that this is one of the worst crises that we are going through, that message is being drilled into you even more fiercely. So, you know, at times you come out more pessimistic, more depressed out of many of these conferences. And then you have investors speaking and talking about opportunities in this crisis. So we almost look like vultures, you know, waiting for opportunities in times of crisis. But having Sunil explain that there is actually 2 trillion worth of dry powder out there, and having Sachin explained how some of the startups are actually in a much better position to be taking advantage of these opportunities because they are much more agile than some of the large corporations. Let me focus a little bit more on what investors can look at. But before that, very quickly, let me introduce what Keiretsu Forum is. All I would say is that we do very similar work as Mumbai Angels, looking at opportunities for investors. The only difference is that we are a global organization. It's been around for about 20 years now, based in the US, but with about 56 chapters around the world, and one of the biggest number of fundings last year. Now, let me, take it a little lighter. It's been a very serious discussion talking about problems. Certainly, there is no debate that this is one of the worst crises that we are going through. I think the only debate is whether the recovery is going to be in the shape of a V or a U or a W, or it's not even going to happen for a long time and it remains in the shape of an L. But there is also another way of looking at it. Any disruption to daily routine is in some sense a signal. For example, if you catch a little fever, I know these days it's more scary with the COVID context, but otherwise it's just a sign that your body needs a break, it needs some rest, and probably it needs some time to heal and rebound. Similarly, probably the COVID pandemic is also a signal that the world needed to slow and take a break to heal. And I hope all of you who are forced to stay at home had a good break, first of all, even though it took a forced shutdown to make that happen. So it's not all bad as far as I'm concerned. It's been a good break, and I think these are one of those times when you, like they say, get on the balcony and take a view on how things were going, what the opportunities are, and how you want to proceed. But all good things will come to an end, and we will soon be forced back to our routines. We may continue to debate whether the recovery is going to be in what shape, but there is no debate that probably within another week or two, we will be forced to be back to our routines. And what I do as a routine is to look at early stage companies to invest, both as an investor personally, and also as someone who's running Keiretsu Forum, which is a collective of investors. Gaurav, as you had earlier mentioned, there have been estimates which said that the global startup economy had created some $2 to $3 trillion in economic value over the last couple of years. And with the corona lockdown now happening around the world, there is also a fear that billions of dollars of that value may be leaking away through destruction of demand, disruptions to supply at times, and most importantly, because of the disappearance of funding options for companies. And very often for early stage companies, funding is one of the most critical components, even if they are doing well otherwise, for them to survive. Now, this is true to an extent because any crisis brings with it pain, and it does cause some churn, and sometimes a lot of churn. But as many of you also rightly said, with every crisis in the past, uh, there have been opportunities, and it's not going to be any different this time either. Disruptive companies with sustainable models and operations will come out much stronger. Um, as Badri and many others mentioned earlier, unlike in some of the previous crises where it was the financial community which was leading from the front, this time it is the healthcare and pharma community which is at the forefront of fighting this crisis. But I would also add that even the very definition of what is pharma and what is healthcare is changing as a result of this crisis. For example, I'll just tell you that three out of the companies, portfolio companies, which we had invested in through Keiretsu, which have come up with very relevant products for the current crisis are not pharma companies. One is an IoT company which had products for geofencing and so on. They've already got an order from the Apollo chain of hospitals. They are working with similar chains in Japan. I'm talking about a company called SenseKiss. Won't go into the details. Another one is a company which was actually working on developing a tractor of all things, an autonomous um, electric tractor, but they were also in office automation. And they have already started work on devising a number of robots which can help in sanitizing facilities, treat people, and so on. And the third is a company which was actually in aerospace. And a year back, they had designed a product for Airbus, where they had designed a ceiling mounted infrared sanitizer for the seats for airplanes. At that point, the view was that if you could make this automated and infrared based as opposed to physical cleaning of the aircraft after it lands, you could actually make the turnaround much faster, and therefore the airplanes could be longer in air and therefore be much more optimized. Now, none of these were actually pharma companies, but these are some of the companies which are really leading from the front when it comes to innovation. Now, how does it all affect investors? Obviously, these are all opportunities, and it is normal that growth stage valuations drop during events like this. But that also allows those people with liquidity to invest at very compelling valuations, both in the public markets as well as in the private markets. And in fact, those who actually deployed capital during the 2008 financial crisis were actually the ones who were rewarded with some of the best companies and returns one could really ask for. And I think there is no difference going to be this time too. Growth stage valuations will come down if they haven't already come down, and it will be quite a sharp decline. But if you look at the previous crisis in 2008, the financial crisis as an example, uh, the valuations which very sharply fell in 2008, 2009, took only about 18 months to get back to pre-recession levels from the 2009 bottom. And we all know that the public markets took much, much longer to get back to where they were before the crisis started. So then, should we all rush to invest into startups? That's an interesting question. And while there are opportunities plenty, investors have also got to navigate through the uncontrolled barrage of information hitting them, and this is all the more so now with proliferation of communication devices, be it this or WhatsApp or social media. There is too much of information happening out there being shared, and a large part of this flow is either not relevant or sometimes even more dangerously is actually misinformation. And therefore, being skeptical and questioning is probably the simple, most useful tool to start with if you are an investor. The other, of course, is to find a structured process or a platform. It could be Keiretsu Forum, it could be Mumbai Angels, it could be something else. And with this, I want to come to the point which you raised. What is it that organizations like Keiretsu are doing to help investors and companies in times like this? I will not go into detail, but I'll just share one example to tell you why, being a part of a network, a structure is important, especially in times like this. With COVID raising its head and people forced to stay at home about a month back or a little over a month back, investors very quickly realized that Zoom, which is a platform we are using now to do this webinar, could be a major beneficiary. And on a certain day in the second half of February, the shares of Zoom Technologies went up by almost 80% in a matter of just 2 hours of trading.
I think we have lost Denny, or the signal has some issue. So there are 2 or 3 questions that I will take up, which people have asked. So my